And welcome to this session of the Data Doctor. This is the first one for this year. I'm really excited to be back with you. I hope you all had a great end of the year and you're looking forward to a new year. I know I am. Today we're going to talk about something that's a little different. We're going to talk about dynamic zone visibility. And that's a function that was added in release 22.3. Now we're going to talk about what it is, how to configure it. Then we're going to look at some use cases. Dynamic zone visibility is a way to show and hide objects on a dashboard. Now, it's really a very cool feature because you can show and hide any individual object. I mean, I can hide worksheets, for example, or I can hide filters or legends or containers nested in containers. And you might be thinking, well, yeah, isn't that just like a sheet swap? Well, if you're working with worksheets, yeah, it is kind of like a sheet swap, but it's much, much more than a sheet swap, and they are much easier to use. There's three parts to doing a dynamic zone visibility. The first part is you have to create a Boolean trigger. You're going to hear me talk about triggers this morning. A Boolean trigger, all it does is it's an expression or a parameter that returns either a true or a false. And when it's true, we're going to see the visible zone, if you will. And when it's false, we're not going to see the visible zone. Then we're going to take that trigger and we're going to include it on the marks card in the details section of a worksheet. And then we have to set up the layout tab of the dashboard. And that's where things get really different. Before, when you're using like a sheet swap, all your work is done on the individual worksheet. Here, dynamic zone visibility is set up on the upper portion of the layout tab on your dashboard. And we'll get into that in detail. And I'd like to start with something very simple. And we're just going to take a look at this. This is just a chart where I've got a line chart or a trend chart looking at the three categories of Superstore data: furniture, technology, and office supplies. And I put them in a horizontal container. So I've just got three worksheets put in a horizontal container. And I also have a parameter up here called select category. And when I select this category, we look at furniture and all we see is the furniture. Or if our office supplies, all we see is the office supplies, or if I select all, we can see all three of these. And you're going to say, well, that's just like a sheet swap. And yes, it is. And we're going to use that. I'm going to show you how this is done, and then we're going to build upon it. Well, the first thing we have to do is create each one of these sheets individually. And when we create each one of these sheets, I just use a simple date axis, and I've just put sales on it. But I also put in this trigger. And the trigger here is defined as, and this is a Boolean expression. And it says if this category, and I'm going to open up this parameter here in just a second. If the parameter equals furniture or the parameter equals all, return a true. If not, return a false. And let's take a look at what that parameter setup looks like. All I've done is create a parameter on category, and then I manually added all and none in that category. Okay. So we've got the furniture sheet. We also have the same type of sheet for office supplies, and I've got a trigger for that sheet also, and it's the same trigger. It just keys on office supply or all, and then we do the same thing for technology. And I'm not going to open that up. You can understand what that's all about. And then I place them in the same container on the dashboard. Now here's where things start getting different. Now the way a dynamic zone visibility works is it's set up on the layout tab of the dashboard. And we open up the layout tab and go up to this upper section here. And this is where you set up the what you want to do with the zone visibility. Now you notice here I've got this furniture category worksheet. That's the item that's selected. It's a worksheet. You saw set up the worksheet, and I've got one of these for technology, and then I've got the same sort of thing for office supplies. So if we look at furniture, we want to show the title. We can make this floating if we want, and later I'll show you how you can use this as a floating cell, but it's going to be a fixed image right now. And here's where you set the trigger on what's going to make this visible or not visible. And I can select from a drop down. I've got a number of triggers in here. And for this one, we set up that furniture true false on the furniture tab. And that's going to be our trigger for this block. For technology, we're going to use the technology trigger. And for office supplies, we're going to use the office supplies trigger. And that's all there is to it. And what happens is when this trigger is true, that worksheet will be visible. When it's false, it will not be visible. So if we go over and look at the total dashboard, look at furniture, now we see nothing but the furniture tab. And yes, this is like a sheet swap, but I think it's much, much easier to use. Now let's build upon this. We can do more than just look at one individual sheet. Let's take a look at something that might look like this. Now what I've done is I've come back to each one of these categories, and I've added a second chart. And to be honest with you, to create the second chart, all I did was duplicate the chart. And then once I've duplicated the chart, I changed its chart type to a box and whisker chart. So now I've got a box and whisker chart and a line chart or a trend chart for each one of the categories. Now, in addition to that, what I've done is I've created a vertical container for furniture, a vertical container for office supplies, and a vertical container for whiskers, box and whiskers. And I've dropped that into our horizontal container. And we can open that up and we can look at it here. I'm just opening. So when we look at the furniture box and whisker, or the furniture container, the vertical container, it's got two worksheets in it. It's got the vertical box and whisker, and it's also got the trend chart. And I've done the same thing for each one of these. Okay. And that's for office supplies, and you can see it's for office supplies, and technology is the same way, and I'm not going to open that up. But you can also see now for the container, I'm going to use that same trigger. The trigger that we created earlier, the true false trigger we created on the line chart, also got copied over right here to the box and whisker chart. And I'm using that trigger now, not on the individual charts, but on the whole container itself, the whole vertical container. So now when I go in here and take furniture, for example, I'm now looking at that one container. That's the one container that's visible. The other containers are no longer visible. Now I wanted to show you one other thing. You see how here I've got another parameter. And this is a parameter that I created just to show you that while I'm looking at data, I can still use other parameters and other filters to filter the data that's in there or change the data that's in there. This parameter allows me to change the level of the date. And all this parameter is I can choose between year, month, or quarter. And I've got, for my horizontal axis here, I've got a function where I'm looking at the date at the level selected in the parameter. So when the parameter is set to years, I'm looking at the year level. When it's set to quarters, I'm looking at quarters and months and so on. So we can change that parameter. We'll go to months here. And at the same time, we can use our dynamic visibility zone to just look at the element that we want to look at. Here we're looking at office supplies. And if we want to change that to quarters, we can change it to quarters and we can change back again. So these things will interact with one another. Now, this is much easier to do than what I'd have to do if I had to set this up on each individual sheet to make that happen. Now, it occurred to me after I did this, I said, well, having to do drop downs may not be what you want to do with your biz. You may want to use a parameter action to change that parameter. So all I've done is I've created another chart that's overall sales by category, and I place that on our chart, and it's sitting right here. And you see I no longer have the drop down for category. And to this dashboard, I've added a parameter action. The parameter action, just very simply, looks at the overall sales by category. And when I select one of these categories, I'm going to change the category parameter. The parameter that's being changed is the select category. That's the one that we've been using to look at different categories. And when I clear the selection, it's going to set to all. And now when I've done that, this now controls it controls the view, and in addition to that, it controls the dynamic zone visibility. So if I wanted to look at office supplies, for example, I could look at office supplies, or we could look at technology, or we could just clear it by clicking on any other thing, and we see all categories. Okay. So by using dynamic zone visibility, it provides a lot of flexibility, and it's very easy to use. I want to take a look at a couple of other use cases. I do a lot of work with maps, and I like to use something like a map and select a state on a map and use that as a within a parameter to change the state that we're looking at in different chart types. And that's what I've created here. I have a map, and I also have a container. And inside this container, I've got 3 sheets included in here. I've got one for bars, one for furniture, and one for technology. And I'm going to show you how I created those sheets. It's the same process we've just been through. And when I select a state, you can see this bar chart changes, and it puts the name of the state up there, and I'm getting different values that we can read the state of Ohio. When I release it, it comes back and I see all of the states. And I can change that type to a line chart or a text chart. And we're going to use the same technique that we used before. I have to create, first of all, I have to create a bar chart. And on that bar chart, I've got this is a Boolean trigger called bar view. And bar view is just reading a parameter that says when select view, our parameter equals bar, this returns a true, and select no, select view format right there in front of me, and I couldn't see it. It's nothing more than a string parameter for line, bar, and view, and text. Okay. And we've done the same thing for a line chart and for a text chart. And they're triggered by similar Boolean parameters that read that same parameter. When the select view is text, this returns a true, otherwise it returns a false. And then when we put them together, we're able to change the look of that chart. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to add a second chart in here, a horizontal chart. But I looked at a second line chart, horizontal chart, and this got kind of nasty. So I decided, well, no, I'm going to make it a vertical. I'm going to change this to a vertical frame and place it over here. And I want that to look something like this, where I can come in and put in a bar chart. And we can look at the bars And I'm going to show you how I created this second chart in just a second. And each of these is going to, um, each of the individual worksheets is going to be controlled by that trigger. So for the bar chart and for the secondary bar chart, they're both controlled by the bar view. And to create the second bar chart, all I did was take a copy of the first bar chart and make a second bar chart. And I just started counting customers and made it a horizontal bar chart just for illustration purposes. And we put them all in the same container. And it's in a container here. And that container, now the whole container, is controlled by something called a show hide parameter. So I've created another parameter, and we're going to take a look at the show hide parameter. And this is a Boolean parameter. I don't know if you've used Boolean parameters before, but all you do is you open up the data type and you select Boolean. And it's a Boolean parameter, and it has two values. One is true, the other is false. So when the value is true, we want the visibility zone to be true. And when it's false, we don't want to see the zone. I didn't want to use true and false, so you have the option of putting an alias in here, and I put it in as show and hide. You could use whatever, but I selected show and hide. So now, if I don't want to see this bar chart at all, if I don't want to see this whole section, I can go up here and I can select hide. Or I can show that parameter. And these are still linked back to our states. We can look at the state of California, for example, or the state of Texas, for example, and we can see them that way. Or we can hide everything that's there. Okay. I want to show you a couple more examples here, just real quick. I know that some of y'all like to have a chart, and then below that chart, what you'd like to see is the actual values that are made up in that chart. I'd like to see them all. And to do that, I created a second example for the bar chart. And all I did with something like this was I took the bar chart and I created it as a crosstab so that you could see the values that make up the chart itself. And whoops. And just like before, okay, you can take that. Sorry, I misplaced a chart here. We'll be right back to it. Not that one. Not that one. You can take those examples and you can drop them into that bar chart and do the same sort of show and hide and just look at the both the chart and the text examples. I've got one more sheet that I'd like to show you. And I know often I end up making a dashboard that's pretty complex. And I'd like to have instructions in there to tell the user how to use that chart. And when I put those instructions on the chart itself, the chart gets kind of busy. So for new users, I'd like them to be able to see the chart and I'd like them to be able to see the instructions, but after they're comfortable with it, I'd like them to be able to hide those instructions. You don't really want to see them. So I created a worksheet, and all this is a text table that just outlines what the instructions are. And I placed that over my worksheet. And I created with that another parameter that says show hide instructions. And to look at that, the show hide instructions is just another Boolean parameter. Oops, I saw it right there. It's just another Boolean parameter. that's true or false. And for the aliases, I used yes and no. And I place them on my sheet and I drop them here. And for formatting here purposes, I used radio buttons here, a single value list, and they're radio buttons. So now this block is controlled, first of all, as a floating sheet. I've floated that over the dashboard. And second, the visibility of that sheet is controlled by the show hide instructions. So when I set this parameter to no, the instructions disappear. And this is the same sort of worksheet we've used before. I've done one other thing here. I've taken those show hide instructions and I've included them in this sidebar. And that sidebar includes the category, it includes the date levels and some of the other, it includes the legend. And if we don't want to see any of that, we just hit hide. And now we don't see any of them. So you can pop views in and out. You can pop legends in and out of a view and filter drop downs in and out of a view or instructions in and out of a view. You can make them floating very, very easily by using the dynamic zone visibility. Well, that's what I wanted to share with you this morning. It's a relatively new feature. It was introduced in the middle of last year. I found it, started playing around with it, and I like it a whole lot. It is so much easier to use than sheet swapping. And if any of you have ever popped views in and out of a dashboard, it can be a pretty involved process, but using dynamic zone visibility makes it very easy. I'd suggest that you give them a try. Everything we talked about this morning is already out on my blog at jimdehner.com. The workbook that we're looking at can be downloaded off my Tableau public site. Thank you very much for your time and hope to see you